At the outset, I wish Mahashivratri to all. May Lord Shiva bless everyone with good health, peace, and wisdom. It is my pleasure to introduce today's resource, Dr. Sudha Gopinath. Dr. Sudha has a doctorate in philosophy from Bangalore University. She has over 25 years of teaching experience. She taught the postgraduate students at Bangalore University. After her retirement, she taught philosophy to the PG students of Dharmaram College. She has also taught the PG diploma students of M.H. Krishna Institute of Oncology. She has published a number of articles in the Encyclopedia of Philosophy. She is an academic associate of Encyclopedia of Hinduism, a project jointly sponsored by Columbia University, USA, and Indian Heritage Research Foundation, Rishikesh. Currently, she is an advisor at Destination Heritage. Over to you, Dr. Sudha.
Thank you, Sharmila. Now it's over to you, Dr. Sudha Gopinath.
Madam, please unmute yourself.
I can't hear. Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you. At the outset, I would like to convey my thanks to each one of you at the School of Wisdom and Sajini in particular for giving me this opportunity to be a part of the satsang on a day so auspicious as the Shivaratri, which is today. So I'm really humbled that I have been asked to face an august audience like you on a great day like now. Today's talk, as the title suggests, is about Buddhism. But before we go on to Buddhism, let us say a word or two about what we generally understand the term ancient wisdom in the Indian context. In the Indian context, the moment anybody speaks of this phrase, ancient wisdom, what comes to our mind is the Vedic knowledge. Because Vedas are undoubtedly the earliest of civilizations in the world. The word Veda itself comes from the root vid, which means knowledge. We could even call it wisdom. And therefore, we see that the Vedas developed to even make room for several other schools of thought in Indian philosophy. Indian philosophy it is Tattva Gnana. It is Tattva Gnana. That means it is actually not just knowledge as we generally understand, but it is something which goes beyond that. When you go through any school of Indian philosophy, most of the schools, I wouldn't say any, but most of the schools of Indian philosophy, what we notice is that we are very clear that logic and the philosophical subtleties is not the end of the road. There is something beyond that. You know, there is an awareness that knowledge can take you thus far and no further. Therefore, it is darshana. It is something that we see. It is an intuitive knowledge. That is what we generally understand as the final goal that each one of us should be wanting to reach, which comes to be known as Mukti in Hinduism, Nirvana in Buddhism. Now, looking at the place of Buddhism in the Indian thought, what we notice is Buddha arrived on the scene of philosophical thinking at a time when yagas and yajnas had become quite popular. He was in fact not so impressed with the idea of the yagas, And it was, in a sense, a revolt against the whole process of yagas, because the rules and regulations that covered the yagna became more important than the spirit in which it was performed. This is what made Buddha go against Vedic thinking. Coming to the point, Buddhism is a non-Vedic school, but 100% it is an Indian or Indic religion. The emphasis is not so much on philosophical subtleties. The emphasis in Buddha is more on an experience which he thought is possible only with good thinking, meditation, and finally reaching what he calls nirvana. Nirvana can be also understood as mukti or moksha in the Indian context or in the Hindu context. Buddha, as you know, was not Buddha as he was born. He was Siddhartha. Siddhartha was a prince, which, no, I don't have to tell the august audience, but still just a word or so. But at the young age of 29 years, he was inclined towards renunciation, because every one instance of pain made him well aware that it is a universal occurrence. That is, it's a universal problem. If it is a universal problem, maybe dukkha is a universal problem, then is there no solution to it? Was the question that was foremost in the minds of the Buddha. Siddhartha became the Buddha on his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. Before we come to that, at 29, what happened? I do not want to go into the details of how he saw a dead body, etc. All that most people would be knowing, so I won't go into it. But he left his life of comfort, because those were the days when they thought to seek knowledge, one has to go through certain austerities. Therefore, he left his life of comfort and proceeded to find the truth. The truth is what he wanted to get. He said that by the dawn of truth, he will be able to give a solution to the problem which he called dukkha. The one thing that was in his mind was, it is sarvam dukkham. If this is so, then what is it that I can do to help everyone to get out of this problem? The first step that he took was to seek the advice of certain teachers. But somehow he was not satisfied with whatever was given to him. Therefore, he said, no, this is not the route I want to take. So then what else do I do now to find my solution? Therefore, the next step that he took was that he went into severe austerities. When he went into these severe austerities, like mortifying himself, he had 5 students along with him who were, quite taken up by the way in which he was able to go through the austerities with that kind of dedication. But somehow Siddhartha was not satisfied with that, because he thought it was not really giving him peace. Therefore, he gave up that also, and then he said that it is only through meditation I am going to find the truth. That is when he sat under the Bodhi tree and he became the enlightened one. That means he became the Buddha. We always call him the Buddha because each one of us have the Buddha within us. So therefore, it is possible for us also to become Buddhas. But he was the Buddha because he was the founder of this solution. Now, how did he get that enlightenment? it is while he sat in meditation, he was troubled by the word used in Buddhist texts is Mara. He was troubled by Mara can be translated simply as temptations. Actually, they show in pictorial, drawings and things like that. They show how there are a number of agencies who come and go on troubling him while he was trying to concentrate and meditate and so on. But actually, figuratively, what you can understand it is that he was troubled by temptations, but he was able to overcome all that. In other words, he conquered desire, he conquered attachment, and by conquering evil thoughts, he was able to see the light. And that is when he became, they called him a Veera, a hero. Then they called him a victor, a Jina. Then they called him a Tathagata. That means one who knows. That is when he became the Buddha. This itself gave such a glow on his face that the 5 friends who had deserted him when he said, severe austerities is not my method, came back to him. Then they became the first students of the Buddha. And therefore, the Sangha was born. I'm very delighted to use the word Sangha with you because what you are also doing is a satsanga. So therefore, how important the Sangha, the very word Sangha is brought out by the Buddha. Therefore, they became the first disciples who heard his sermon, which has come to be known as Dharma Chakra Pravartana. That means it is the first sermon that Buddha gave out to the world. The translation for this word Dharma Chakra is setting in motion the wheel of law. So with this, he was able to propound his thoughts. But what is to be understood before we go on to the teachings of the Buddha is, Buddha was not really interested in logical subtleties, metaphysical argumentation. He was not interested. That means philosophy per se was not what he was really interested in. What he was interested in was to find a solution. In fact, very often, Buddha is called the great healer. What is it that he wanted to do? He wanted to find out the cause of this suffering. If you find the cause, he said, it's very easy to get rid of the effect. This was the most important lesson that he learned under the Bodhi tree. So he said, now it is my duty to see what is the cause of suffering. There is not a single person who has not gone through some kind of suffering or the other once he is on this earth. Therefore, Buddha was in search of this truth, and when it dawned on him, he tried to give it to his disciples, his followers, in the very simple fashion which comes to be known as Buddhism today. And what is important here to remember is Buddhism, therefore, is very pragmatic and positivistic. By calling it positivistic, what I'm trying to convey to you is Buddha did not believe in anything which went beyond perception and reasoning. He did not want to believe in anything occult. Hence, Buddhism is one system which, in a philosophy book, they would call it a heterodox system, or they call it sometimes an astika. That's because he did not believe in either a permanent self or anything which cannot be known by perception and reason. Therefore, he did not believe in a God. As I told you earlier, Buddhism is a non-Vedic school, or it was not in tune with the Vedas, but still we will notice at the end of this lecture in what sense we can still relate Buddhism to Hinduism, that we will look into it later. The other schools which are also non-Vedic are Jainism and Charvaka. Now, what I'm trying to concentrate on is not the present day or contemporary idea of what we understand as Buddhism, namely the schools where you insist upon Vipassana, Zen, all these ideas came much later. What I'm talking of is really the ancient wisdom of the Buddha. Whatever were the words of the Buddha, now that I have used the word word, what I mean by it is Buddha never wrote any books. He only spoke. The spoken word of the Buddha was understood by his disciples, and very many years later it came to be documented and came to be known. And of course the Buddhist literature is very vast. It is in Prakrit, it is in Pali, it is also in Sanskrit. Therefore the wealth of knowledge that has come to us as Buddhism is large. Maybe it's not possible to go through most of it in our lifetime, but however, Buddha himself never wrote anything. What has come down to us has the canonical work of the Buddha. What has come down to us is known as the Tripitakas. The word is self-explanatory, namely three. Tripitaka, that is by 3 baskets of learning it is known as. The 3 baskets of learning are Sutta Pitaka. First I'll give the name, then we will go through what they mean. Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. Dhamma means Dharma. It's as simple as that. Now, what is Sutta Pitaka? Sutta Pitaka means the utterances of the Buddha. The utterances of the Buddha can be, you can, the easiest name that you can associate with the Sutta Pitaka would be the Dhammapada, Jataka tales, and things like that, because they were the spoken words of the Buddha. Then what is Vinaya Pitaka? Vinaya Pitaka is rules of conduct. Buddha believed in the middle path. Therefore, the rules of conduct in Buddhism is not severe like in Jainism, nor is it indulgence. Like you say, okay, he didn't believe in indulgence, otherwise he wouldn't have left his comfort to go into the forest to do meditation. Then Abhidhamma Pitaka is really what we call philosophical discussions. I told you earlier that Buddha was not really interested in, in philosophical subtleties, logical reasoning and going into very ununderstandable theories and things. However, though the aim of the Buddha was not metaphysics, but there is a metaphysical foundation to Buddha's teachings, because it's absolutely important to have a metaphysical foundation in order that the teachings are meaningful. And therefore, even though there is no metaphysical aim in Buddhism, there is a metaphysical foundation in Buddhism or metaphysical view that is the foundation of the practical teachings of the Buddha. And that's exactly what I want to bring out through this talk. And most of the, the knowledge that we have gained on Buddhism comes from Buddha Ghosha from Ceylon. I mean, those days Ceylon, today Sri Lanka, because it is much later Buddhism broke into Hinayana and Mahayana, or what you have generally come to understand as the schools of Buddhism that came much later. But in the time of the Buddha, it was simply what he spoke and what people understood and they came into his Sangha, and therefore they also strove to become the Buddha. He looked at the whole problem, what he called Sarvam Dukkham, as a roga. That means it is an ailment. So if it is a roga, it must have a cause, or you must diagnose as to why you got this roga. Therefore, he says diagnosis is extremely important, which comes to be known in Sanskrit itself as roga hetu. That means the cause of the ailment. And he said that overcoming evil is deliverance from pain. Therefore, he said, philosophy purifies none, peace alone does. So how do you get that peace? He said you get that peace when you are able to really get out of your evil thoughts and try to concentrate and try to get the vision. So it is a vision. It once again is a darshana. But when you speak of darshana, the word darshana, all of you are in the satsang, so I don't have to say it in so many words. But the darshana always brings us to the Shad darshanas that are Vedic schools, namely Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttara Mimamsa. All these 6, Uttara Mimamsa also will be Vedanta. So all these schools are based on the Vedic truths. But Buddhism itself is not really based on the Vedas, because he revolted against the yagas and the yagnas, and he thought that he has to give a simpler theory which is understood by everyone, and it is something which should be pragmatic and absolutely positive. And hence the first thing that he spoke of is that what is it that we experience in our own life? He said that one thing that we are aware of is that there is a difference between consciousness and matter. All of us are aware of that. Then what is this consciousness that I am talking of? He said, yes, consciousness is something that I am aware of, but still it is not necessary because there is consciousness that there must be a permanent self. This was one of the things, or one of the main things with which he went against the Vedic teachings. So, to quote Buddha himself, what he said is, we stumble upon some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. This is experience. What is it that we experience in our day-to-day life? We see, we are able to experience heat, cold, light, darkness, love, hatred, pain, pleasure. All these things we are all aware of. Then he said, if this is something that we are able to accept, then why is it necessary to think that all these belong to a permanent self? It is not necessary at all. He said that there is no need to believe that these sensations belong to a permanent self. They are states of consciousness. Then what is the self according to the Buddha? He said the self is a samghata. The self, by samghata, I'm sure you know what I mean. It means an aggregate. So what is it made up of? It is an aggregate of what he called nama rupa. That means name and form. Hinduism also uses nama rupa in a different meaning altogether. Therefore, he said it is a psychological entity. What you call self is simply a psychological entity which can be called nama rupa. And it is made up of 5 factors. What are they? Those 5 factors are Vedana. Number 1 is Vedana. Vedana is sensation or feeling of pleasure, pain, etc., indifference, whatever. That is Vedana. Number 2 is Sangna, that is perception. Perception is or conceptual knowledge. Through perception, when you think of a theory of knowledge, what you say is, I perceive something and then I have an idea, therefore I'm able to know this is a table. When I see a table, I'm able to say this is a table because of the idea of the table and the perception of the table. Therefore, the third factor that he spoke of was samskara or conative disposition, which is very important in Buddhism. Conative disposition. And fourth is vijnana or discriminative knowledge or discriminative intelligence. These are the psychological factors with which we are made up of. Then rupa. Rupa is the physical form that I carry for myself. So therefore he said, what are we? We are a Sangata. We are made up of the Nama and the Rupa. Then what about, this is so far as the human being is concerned. Then what about matter? Because he said we can make a clear distinction between consciousness and matter. So what is matter? Then he said, matter or any substance is also a Sangata. So what do you mean by that? The best way I can explain what a Sangata is in terms of material things is a story between king of a particular place, the king Menander, who goes to a sage by name Nagasena, and he goes to him and says, can you please tell me the secret of what Buddha meant by the Sangata? What does he mean by that self is Namarupa? There is nothing else but that, it is just an aggregate. What is the meaning of this? Immediately the sage asked him, how did you come? He said, I came by a chariot. He said, can you please define a chariot for me? Then he started narrating the number of parts of a chariot, like the wheel, the axle, whatever. So many parts he narrated. Then he said, can you call all these things chariot? He said, no. What I mean is they are all there in it. He said, yes, they are all there in it. But that doesn't mean that that is the chariot. He said, it is the name you have given to the way in which or the method in which you have put all these parts together. And then you have given it a name, namely chariot, and you call it by that name. Therefore, he said, this theory goes hand in hand with another theory of the Buddha, which is known as the theory of momentariness. He said, I say that it is not a constant, it is not permanent, because there is nothing permanent in this world. It is all the name we have given for a certain aggregate, whether it is material things or it is a psychological entity like the human being, the animal, whoever. And hence he said that everything is a flux. Everything is continuously changing. This has come to be known as Kshanikavada because Kshana, every moment, things are changing. To take our own example, I call myself Sudha. That is the name that has been given to me. I have a certain form, etc. I look in a particular way, but I didn't look like this so many years ago when I was born, surely. But still I was called Sudha. Then later I became a young girl. Even then I was called by the same name, but I look different. Now I'm old and still I'm called by the same name. But however, I'm not the same in the sense that I have been continuously changing. In fact, even as I started this talk to now, I have changed. So many moments have gone by. In these moments, I have grown so many moments older also. Therefore, he said, this is the I series. I series. So in my case, it will be Sudha series. That is what it is. So that everything is a series of things for which when you give a name, you put them all together and you say that that is that. Because that is the only way you can exist in this world. You have to give names. Therefore, we give it. So how do you explain the I series or whatever he means by Kshanikavada? How does he explain this? He says that you can explain this with an example. Say, take the example of a flame. Supposing you are seeing a flame burning, every minute, supposing, let us say it is a candle, you will notice that the candle is becoming smaller and smaller as the flame is burning. That means one A1 is taken up by A2, the A3, and so on. So it is a flame series. Now, the other example that is taken by the Buddha is a flowing river. Supposing I go and stand in the river, even the Greeks had said it in Greek philosophy, you can't stand in the same river twice, because by the time you say something, that water has flown away and it has been taken over by another. So the stream is continuous. So from all this, what he said is the notion of fixity is fictitious. There is nothing fixed. Everything is changing. How did he base this theory on what? He surely did not base this theory on chance, because he said, this is not chance. Nature has uniformity. Therefore, the uniformity of nature clearly points out that there is a system, but still you cannot say that it is permanent. So there is nothing permanent in this life. The other thing is that he said is that you cannot say that it is all because of something that is, supernatural intervention. No, you cannot speak of supernatural intervention because we don't see anything supernatural. What you see is natural. Therefore, he said, supernatural intervention, if you were to fall back on, it would be dogmatic. Therefore, he said that change has to be understood as what can be put in his own terminology as conditional existence. This phrase, conditional existence, brings us to the most important theory in Buddhism, which has come to be known as Pratitya Samutpada. Pratitya Samutpada. By that, what you mean is, it is this arising that arises, this ceasing that ceases to be. It is conditional existence. What he means is that the truth is neither being nor non-being, but the truth is becoming. Everything is becoming. Everything is a flux. Everything is continuously changing. Now, what is it that, why is it? I said the most important theory in Buddhism is Pratitya Samutpada. Translated into English, it would be dependent origination. I started by saying Buddha was like the doctor. He wanted to he wanted to diagnose the cause of the roga, namely dukkha. Therefore, now is the time that he is now really the doctor that we were speaking of. So what he is trying to say is that through this theory, you are able to understand how you can overcome suffering. What he means is that there is a necessity of sufficient conditions in everything. What is meant by this? this arising that arises, this ceasing that ceases is the formula. So now this formula can be understood only with an example. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense. So let us take the example of a oil lamp. The oil lamp is burning only when certain conditions are fulfilled. What are they? You need a container. Without a container, it is not possible to burn an oil lamp. Then into the container, I have to pour some oil. That's not also enough. I'll have to keep a wick. Then that's also not enough. Then once the wick is kept, it has to be lighted. In order to light it, maybe you need a matchbox and you need a person to light it as well. Therefore, it means all these conditions, in this example, the container, oil, the wick, the matchbox, the person. All these people, unless they cooperate, it is not possible to have the oil lamp burning at all. Now, what happens if one of the conditions go away? Any one of the conditions going away, the lamp also ceases to be. For example, if there is no wick, the lamp will not burn. If the oil is finished, then also the lamp will cease to burn. If there is no one to light it, then also it will not be possible. Therefore, what he's saying is everything is interdependent. This whole life is interdependent. I'm not alone in anything. I have to depend on all other things around me, all other things in the universe. Everything I have to take care of. Otherwise, it is not possible to find any solution to any problem. Once you believe in interdependence, it means, you see, in Hinduism, we speak of there is Brahman, to quote Radhakrishnan, he says that Brahman sleeps in matter, he breathes in plants, he moves in animals, and he thinks in man. By this quotation, what Dr. Radhakrishnan is trying to tell us is Brahman is omnipresent. He is everywhere. This is how we refer to in Hinduism with regard to that there is some kind of what should you say? There is divinity in everything. Instead of thinking of it in those lines, what Buddha is talking of is every one of us, we are dependent on one thing or the other. So there is an interdependence that is there in this world. And this interdependence is what is very important in order that we live a good life, isn't it? Because we cannot harm anything. If we harm anything, it is as good as harming ourselves. So therefore he says, this is the causal series. This is the causal series in my life. This is not just the lamp. It is the life itself is a causal series. This causal series will not begin unless the conditions are fulfilled and will continue so long as all the factors are there. Therefore, he says every effect has a series of causes. Even earlier, I told you that this is the most important theory in Buddhism because this is what gave rise to, this is what made place for what is popularly known as the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. Most people are aware that Buddha's practical teaching is what is known as the Four Noble Truths. What are they? The first noble truth is dukkha. The second noble truth is samudaya. The third noble truth is nirodha. And the fourth noble truth is the marga. Now let us come to just giving words is of no use. So let us see what he means by these things. Dukkha I don't have to explain. The first noble truth is that dukkha is there. It is a reality, that it is there. So therefore, if it is there, then it is necessary for me to know what is the cause. Therefore, the second one comes, samudaya. The origin of suffering is samudaya. Third is nirodha. Nirodha is removal of suffering. As we have seen in our example, if there is a cause, then taking away one of the conditions also will remove the effect. Therefore, the fourth is the most important, namely marga. Marga is self-explanatory. It is the path. So now, what is dukkha? To quote from Buddhism itself, Buddhist texts itself, it is said like this: birth is painful, decay is painful, disease is painful, union with the unpleasant is painful, painful is separation from the pleasant, any craving that is not satisfied is painful. The five aggregates, namely body, feeling, perception, will, and reason, from attachment is painful. What a wonderful way of explaining how, we experience pain in this world. Why? That's because in simple terminology, attachment is what gives rise to all the things that we have said. You get something pleasant, momentarily you are happy. The moment you lose it or it goes away, because nothing is permanent, it goes off. It goes off, then there is pain again. Therefore, all these things, whatever momentary pleasures that we get, are not permanent solution to what he called dukkha. So, therefore, dukkha is definitely there. There is nothing more to explain on that. Then what did he mean by samudaya? The origin of suffering. This is very important. The samudaya, he gave it with 12 links. The 12 links that he spoke of are ignorance is number one, then that is avidya, then action, samskara, consciousness, vijnana, name and form, nama rupa, the six fields, that is the five senses, the mind with their objects, or in simple Sanskrit term, shadayatana. Number 6 is contact between the senses and their objects, sparsha. 7 is sensation or vedana. 8 is desire or trishna. And 9 is clinging to existence or upadana. 10 is bhava or being. 11 is rebirth or jati. 12 is pain, old age, and death, jara marana. Instead of thinking of the 12 links, we can reduce it to a simpler fashion by saying it is ignorance that everything is impermanent is what makes me think that I want this, I want that. Then that means ignorance leads to desire. That desire born out of attachment leads to activity, which is not the activity that I should think of to get peace. Therefore, it gives birth to, it gives rise to rebirth, or in simple terms, this is the Bhava Chakra. You will notice that in every Mahabodhi society or in every temple of Buddhism, you will always find the chakra, because it is the Bhava Chakra which is what I'm trying to come out of. Therefore, he said that the first noble truth is dukkha. The second noble truth is that there is a cause for it, and the cause can be understood with these 12 links. The most important is that desire is what really makes me do all the wrong things, which only give me temporary pleasure and landing me in permanent dukkha. Therefore, when we were young, we were always told in Kannada, in our school, that Buddha's teaching can be understood as asaye dukkakke karana. That means it is this, or craving, or what you say, greed is the cause of suffering. That is samudaya. Then what is the next one? Namely, nirodha. That nirodha means that it is possible to get out of it. So don't despair. You surely can come out of this suffering, is the third noble truth. The fourth noble truth is what is known as the marga. The marga means the path, and the path he gives it as the eightfold path. What are the various eightfold paths are? Right faith, right resolve, right speech, right action, right living, right effort, right thought, right concentration. These are the 8 limbs of the road that we have to take. To simplify this 8, what we can say is, what Buddha is saying is, try to acquire wisdom, try to have virtues or develop virtues, and all this is possible through samadhi or concentration or meditation. It is possible to go through this, or reach the goal with Shila, Prajna, and Samadhi. Any talk on, I think I'm actually over time. But one thing has to be said, namely, that in spite of not believing in a permanent self, nor believing in God, Buddha believed in the law of karma. If Buddha did not believe in the law of karma, even the Jataka tales would make no sense. Therefore, Buddha was a firm believer in what is known as the theory of karma. What he says is, everything is impermanent. You are not the same person that you were a little before, but still you have got to carry it forward because you are going in that series itself. Therefore, he said karma is something to be believed. One of the things in Dhammapada that you see, because most of philosophical texts are dialogues, Upanishads are dialogues. Similarly, Dhammapada is also a dialogue where one of his students asks him, supposing 2 people were to do the same kind of mistake, would they get the same kind of punishment? He says, instead of giving you a straight answer, I would like you to do a little bit of exercise. That was Buddha's method. Therefore, he said, please take a lump of salt and you put the same amount in a glass of water and in the Ganges, in the river. And come back to me tomorrow after drinking little bit of water from the glass and also from the river. The students do this exercise and then he said, did they taste the same? The students said, definitely not. The glass was terribly salty, but the Ganges was perfectly fine. Therefore, they said that she said that is how it is. Supposing you make amends for the mistakes that you have made, your punishment will be that much less. Whereas if you continue to make mistakes and you continue to be not virtuous, then naturally the punishment will be much more. Therefore, we see that one of the things that he says, if we don't believe in karma, then it is not possible to say as to why we are all born different. See, we are not born in, there are certain things, which we don't choose, but still we are destined to be like that. This is what, in the Hindu text, what we call as prarabdha. Then we have prarabdha, then we start collecting some more karma, which has become sanchita, and that's what leads to the tomorrow that we are going to face, isn't it? That is what it is in Hinduism. Here, what he is talking of is, in order to account for the differences between one person and another, it is the only answer is that man it makes his own destiny. Will have to believe that it is my karma which gives me a good life or a bad life in future. Therefore, what his advice is, we all have latent virtues and we all have latent vices and dormant virtues. So we have many vices which is quite, noticeable by other people, even if it is not by ourselves. But there are many virtues which are in us, but they are dormant. So it is my duty to awaken the dormant virtues. He says this can be awakened with loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. If we were to follow these kind of virtues, nirvana is something that is possible here and now. Nirvana can be compared to Jivan Mukti in the Hindu conceptual thinking, and the person who has been able, nirvana is enlightenment, and the person who has been enlightened on death would be called, went into the state of parinirvana. Nirvana can be translated as becoming cool, because this is where you give up your agitations, then you give up your problems, or the problems just vanish, and therefore you get peace. And the whole of Buddhism is that it is a quest for peace. Immediately after Buddha's death, one of the councils took place, and in that council, all his followers were one. But many years later, the second council took place, and in the second council, they broke up into Hinayana and Mahayana. And today, Hinayana is in only few places, namely Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, and they call themselves Theravada Buddhists. And Mahayana is prevalent in most other parts of the globe, namely Nepal, Tibet, Korea, China, Bhutan, Sikkim, Mongolia, Japan, everywhere it is Mahayana. And most of you would be aware that the highlight of Mahayana Buddhism is the concept of Bodhisattva. Therefore, what they believe is that even after getting nirvana, some people decide to come back to earth, because by saying that I have reached nirvana is like saying I have come out of the clutches of life and death. That is, the bondage is broken. So there is peace, there is absolutely nothing to worry about. But still he comes back to the earth because he wants to see that, or he wants to help others get nirvana. Therefore, in conclusion, what I would like to say is just quote one or two sentences. One of the things that somehow I felt that I should bring out when I'm talking from Bangalore in Karnataka, I was remembering one of the statements of Dara Bendre, where he says, ಸಾವಿಗೆ ನಾ ಹೆದರುವುದಿಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಾ ಇರೋ ತನಕ ಅದು ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಬಂದಾಗ ನಾ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. Therefore, it is not death that we have to be scared of. But what is it that we should be scared of? It is how we behave while we are alive. Therefore, while we are alive, it is necessary for us to have Maitri. That means loving kindness. While we are alive, we should have compassion that is karuna. While we are alive, we should have appreciative joy, that means no jealousy. Therefore, we should have mudita. While we are alive, we therefore should have samachitta, that means equanimity. Don't jump in joy and don't get depressed in sorrow, but have equanimity. This is the message of the Buddha. And before I close, I would like to close it with a quotation from Vivekananda, because prayer and the highest form of prayer, namely meditation, is the most important aspect of being a Buddhist. So let us try to end with this quotation, namely, somebody asked Vivekananda, what do you gain by prayer? You say that prayer is very important. What do you gain by it? To quote, he said, I gained nothing. In fact, I lost anger, depression, jealousy, irritation, and insecurity. Therefore, this is what we are all trying to go to through Buddhist meditation. Since now I have taken my 1 hour, I would like to conclude with this, and I wish everyone once again happy Shivaratri and good living. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudha. Now we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, no.
Any questions, anyone? Kindly unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have two clarifications. I wouldn't put it as questions.
Yeah.
I am Janakiram. It was a very clear exposition of Buddhism and we got some new insights. My first clarification is,
Yeah.
when we think of Buddhism, immediately what comes to mind is lay persons or common people and Buddhist monks. And the rules of conduct are very different. But both of them can reach nirvana.
I missed out on some words. Can you just repeat the question?
There are the two categories, rules of conduct. For common people is one, lay persons.
Yeah.
And then for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis is another.
Yeah.
So now lay persons can also reach nirvana.
Yeah.
Or one has to become a monk or Buddhist bhikkhu.
In Buddhism, because what we are talking of is, see, today what is happening to Buddhism is a different contemporary question, right? You will agree with me. Am I right? Because today we are talking of so many things which Buddha himself had not said. In fact, whatever has come to be as Bodhisattva is also there in Jataka tales, but still Buddha did not try to say that it's not possible for lay person to get nirvana is not the idea of the Buddha at all. But many people choose to become monks. But one advice given by Buddha is that whether you are a monk or you are a layman, the method that you follow should be the middle path. That is what has come to be known in Buddhism as Madhyama Pratipat. The path is the middle path, which he said is the right path that we have to take. It is neither a life of indulgence, nor is it a life of mortification. Both, he says, is sorrowful. Indulgence will also lead you to sorrow. Mortification also makes, because as I told you, when he began his quest, even at that time, he didn't think that austerities were going to take him to nirvana. Meditation, he said, yes, but not mortification. Therefore, mortification is not advised even for the monks in Buddhism. And layperson can surely become the Buddha. That means all of us have a method. If we follow, that we should have a clear mind, virtuous behavior. So thought, word and deed, we have to cleanse ourselves. Then it is possible. It's a hard task, but then it is possible. This is the same as saying you have to give up your ego. Is it so easy to give up your ego? It is not at all that easy. Because the moment I say I did this, I have already become egoistic. Same thing, put in Buddha's words, would be like what you say that, you have to follow this path where you are so disattached that it is possible for you to reach the light. The light is there at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you so much. My second clarification is, you said he didn't talk about metaphysical things. Of course, there is one stream of metaphysical you mentioned, because he talked about heaven and hell.
Oh, these are
which
things
cannot be experienced.
No. This is the problem, because Buddha himself never wrote a book, isn't it? All these things, and also whatever got documented or whatever came into any kind of writing, came hundreds of years after Buddha's death. Hence, there are certain things, whether Buddha said it or not, people said it. Therefore, you cannot put it into Buddha's words. That's why I made it a point to say it is ancient wisdom of the Buddha. What Buddha himself, for certain, he said. Like the Pratitya Samutpada is something which without it, Buddhism collapses. So it's very important. So heaven, hell, it is not very clear whether really Buddha himself spoke about it. When he spoke about any such thing, what he meant is, while I am here, I go through hell, I go through heaven. By good deeds, what results come would be heavenly. By bad deeds will also give rise to its effect, which would be like being in hell. That's how he would put it. Like the glass of salty water, which would be so salty when it is just in a glass, but not at all salty when it is in Ganga. Are you happy, sir?
Madam.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to ask any questions? Kindly unmute yourself and ask.
There is something called Vajrayana. Where this Vajrayana fits in Buddhism?
Vajrayana is something that came up in the Mahayana period. And when did Mahayana begin? So many years after Buddha's death, right? Therefore, Vajrayana has no place in the words of the Buddha. This came later because we always evolve, isn't it? Something is given to us. Then, depending upon the circumstances, things have taken place. So Vajrayana is a very later development in Buddhism. That's why I said it is ancient or early Buddhism I'm talking of. There is another thing called later Buddhism. That is where you speak of Yogacara, Madhyamika, Shunyavada. All these things come in later Buddhism. Therefore, Vajrayana is something which Buddha did not have to answer at all because he never spoke of it. It is today practiced.
I really would like to thank you, Dr. Sudha. Thank you so much, Dr. Sudha Gopinath. It was really wonderful. In this short span of time, you were able to cover so much. So thank you so much. We're hoping that sometime we can have you at the School of Ancient Wisdom and have a longer session on the Buddha.